September 1944, Lorraine, France. The night was so violently lit by artillery flashes that the sky looked like it was burning from the inside out. And in the middle of that trembling orange glow, the first scream tore through the forest, a sound so sharp and desperate that even the American patrol froze in place. It wasn't a soldier's scream. It wasn't the voice of a wounded man. It was a woman. And she was yelling for someone, anyone, to help her. Sergeant Daniel Harper of the U.S. 45th Infantry Division jerked his head toward the tree line just as three figures burst through the smoke. They weren't carrying rifles. They weren't charging. They were running for their lives, mud-covered German female auxiliaries, their Luftwaffe Signal Corps uniforms ripped by branches, their boots slipping on wet leaves. One of them almost fell, caught herself on a broken tree stump, and kept running with wild, terrified breaths. Behind them, echoing down the valley like a death sentence, came the furious roar of German officers. Zurich! Sofort Zurich! Das ist ein Befehl! Return at once. That is an order. Harper raised his hand, signaling his squad to hold position, but the women didn't even look at the American rifles pointed at them. They ran straight for the U.S. soldiers as if they were the only hope left in the world. The youngest, barely 20, reached Harper first. She collapsed to her knees in the mud, grabbed his sleeve with trembling fingers, and gasped in broken English, "Please, don't send us back." It was not the plea he expected from prisoners of war. Private O'Donnell muttered, "Sarge, they're running from their own men." The forest behind them erupted again, branches snapping, boots pounding the ground, the faint metallic clatter of weapons. Harper motioned quickly, and his men spread out in a semicircle around the women, rifles ready. Moments later, a German lieutenant appeared, red-faced and livid, a pistol in his hand. He was followed by two soldiers carrying lanterns, their beams sweeping across the night like accusing fingers. "You Americaner!" the lieutenant barked, gasping for air. "Those women are deserters. They returned to us immediately." Harper didn't lower his weapon. "They're on our side of the line. They're now our prisoners." The lieutenant's face twisted with hatred. "They surrendered without authorization. That is treason. The penalty is execution." The women behind Harper whimpered at that word. One covered her mouth to stop herself from sobbing. Another, tall and hollow-eyed, whispered to the others in German, Word uns toten, we die anderen. He will kill us, like he killed the others." Harper stepped forward, closing the distance between himself and the furious officer. "Not tonight," he said quietly. The standoff grew heavier by the second. Artillery rumbled in the distance. The wind carried the bitter smell of burning villages. The lieutenant's hand flexed on his pistol grip, but something in Harper's posture warned him off. After a long moment, he spat on the ground and stormed back into the darkness, shouting for his men to fall back. As the German lanterns disappeared into the woods, the women collapsed in exhausted relief. Harper immediately called in the report. Within an hour, the women were being escorted toward a temporary American holding point, a bombed-out railway shed lit only by flickering lanterns. But even here, away from the Germans, they huddled together as if afraid of shadows themselves. Colonel Robert T. Frederick, commander of the American unit in the sector, arrived shortly after. He stepped through the broken doorway, studying the trembling group with furrowed brows. Frederick was known for his sharp instincts, and for leading his men with something rare in wartime, compassion. It didn't take him long to notice the way the women flinched at every distant explosion. One of the prisoners, Lieselotte Brandt, stood when he approached. She tried to stiffen her posture like a proper Luftwaffe auxiliary, but the fear in her eyes betrayed her. Frederick spoke gently. "You're safe here. No one will harm you." She shook her head violently. "You don't understand. Major Custer, he said that any woman who surrenders without permission is a coward. He—" She stopped herself, looking at the other women. Frederick's jaw tightened. "What did he do?" But she couldn't finish the sentence. Her voice broke. Night fell harder as the women were marched toward a safer transit point. The moon was low. Fog crawled between the ruined houses. Harper walked near the back of the column, making sure no one strayed. The women stayed close to the Americans, whispering nervously among themselves. When they reached a quiet stretch of forest road with no other soldiers in sight, Harper slowed his pace, turned slightly, and spoke in a low voice meant only for the frightened women closest to him. "We're alone," he said softly. "Now let's do what must be done. Tell me everything. We can't protect you unless we know the truth." At first, none of them spoke. Then Liselott wiped her tears with the back of her hand and finally let the dam break. "He already executed 2 girls in nets," she whispered. "He said we'd be next." A cold silence fell on the American squad. Then, branches snapped behind them. Someone was following. And the women's faces went completely white. The nightmare wasn't over. It was only beginning. The sound of snapping branches came again, sharper this time, followed by the crunch of boots on frozen soil. Harper's hand went straight to the stock of his rifle. He raised a clenched fist, and the squad halted as one. The women jolted, eyes wide, as the Americans turned toward the darkness behind them. A low, guttural voice in German floated through the trees, too far to make out the words, close enough to make every muscle tense. "Down off the road," Harper ordered quietly. The squad moved fast but controlled, guiding the women into the shallow ditch along the roadside, using the ridge and brambles as cover. The lanterns were quickly hooded, plunging the column into near darkness. Breaths came in white clouds. Somewhere in the woods, a man cursed softly in German. Another answered him, the exchange growing closer. Harper slid beside Liselott, who was pressed against the damp earth, shaking so hard he could feel it through her coat. "You know that voice?" he murmured. She nodded, barely able to speak. "Custer's men, they always come first. He waits. He watches." The thought of a German officer standing somewhere in the black timberline, deciding which of these women would live or die, ignited something hard and cold in Harper's chest. He signaled O'Donnell and 2 others to take positions on the opposite side of the road, covering the approach. A pair of faint shapes emerged between the trees, 2 German soldiers, creeping, rifles slung low, searching the ground for tracks. They moved methodically, scanning, listening, unaware of the Americans only yards away. The women huddled tighter, one pressing her forehead into the crook of her arm to muffle her terrified sobs. Harper waited until the Germans were almost at the edge of the road. Then he stepped out, rifle raised, his voice cutting through the night like a whip. "Hands up! U.S. Army!" The Germans froze, eyes wide. One's fingers twitched toward his weapon. O'Donnell's safety clicked off loudly in the dark. The message was clear. Slowly, grudgingly, the 2 men raised their hands. Within minutes they were disarmed, wrists bound with field cord, pushed to their knees on the roadside. Harper knelt in front of the older one. "Why are you following us?" he demanded. The man spat blood-tinged saliva into the dirt. "Those women belong to Major Custer. He ordered us to retrieve them." Harper's grip tightened on the man's collar. "They surrendered to us. They're POWs now. He has no claim." The German gave a humorless laugh. "You don't know him. He would rather shoot them than let them serve as your trophies." Behind Harper, Liselott whispered to another woman. Meint es ernst. If he finds us, we are dead." "He means it. If he finds us, we are dead." The prisoners were marched under guard with the column until they reached the rail yard where Colonel Frederick waited. The building that served as headquarters had once been a station office. Now its roof sagged, its windows boarded with scavenged planks. Inside, lantern light cast long shadows over maps pinned to cracked walls. Frederick stood with his sleeves rolled up, studying a marked map when Harper stepped in, helmet tucked under his arm, mud on his boots, worry sharp in his eyes. "Sir, we've got a problem with those women you took in." Frederick looked up. "More than the usual problem of feeding and housing POWs?" "Yes, sir. Their own officers are hunting them." Frederick listened as Harper laid it out, the chase through the woods, the German lieutenant's threats, the captured scouts admitting they were acting under Custer's orders. The colonel's expression darkened at the mention of executions. He called for the interpreter, then had Lieselot and 2 other women brought in, gently, with a chair and blanket for each. They sat stiffly, hands clenched, eyes darting around the room as if expecting Custer to step from the shadows at any moment. In halting English, with the interpreter filling in the cracks, Lieselot told Frederick what she had seen in Metz. 2 young female auxiliaries lined up in the courtyard, accused of surrendering a relay station without a direct order. Custer had read from a codebook, pronounced them cowards, and supervised their execution by firing squad. No trial. No defense. Just an example. Frederick didn't interrupt. He watched her eyes, the way they flinched at certain memories, the way the others nodded along in grim confirmation. When she finished, there was a silence that felt heavier than artillery. "Colonel," Harper said quietly, "if we hand them back, it's a death sentence." "No question." Frederick turned to the map, but he was no longer seeing the lines and arrows. He was seeing 2 young women in Metz collapsing under German bullets. He was seeing these women in front of him taking their place, one by one, in some muddy field if he looked the other way. He exhaled slowly. "We're not handing them back," he said at last. "As of now, they are under American protection. Any German officer who wants them will have to explain himself to me and to the laws of war." It was the kind of decision that sat on a man's shoulders. Word traveled fast. By dawn, the temporary camp hummed with gossip. Some American soldiers grumbled about special treatment for the female POWs, but most had seen enough horror to recognize real fear when it stared back at them. They tightened the perimeter. Extra guards were posted along the rail lines and at the splintered gate. An hour after sunrise, a staff car bearing a white flag appeared on the road leading to the camp. It rolled to a slow stop in front of the main entrance, and from it stepped Major Wilhelm Custer. He was not a large man, but he carried himself with the certainty of someone who had always been obeyed. His field gray uniform was immaculate, his boots shine incongruously clean amid the mud. 2 junior officers flanked him, along with a driver who kept his eyes lowered. Frederick met him just inside the gate, with Harper and 2 MPs at his shoulders. The air was brittle with tension. "Major Custer, I assume," Frederick said evenly. The German officer inclined his head with a precise, almost theatrical nod. "And you are Colonel Robert Frederick," he answered in accented but careful English. "Your reputation precedes you." Custer wasted no time. "You have in your custody women of the Luftnachrichten service who belong to the Luftwaffe command. They left their posts without authorization. They are subject to German military justice. I am here to take them back." Frederick's gaze didn't waver. "They surrendered to American forces. That makes them our prisoners. Under the Geneva Convention, Major, prisoners cannot be transferred into the custody of those who intend to punish them for surrendering." Custer's jaw tightened. "They are cowards. They deserted their positions. We do not accept cowardice." Frederick took a step closer, his voice dropping just enough that the nearby guards leaned in to hear. "And I do not accept the execution of unarmed women for the crime of wanting to live, Major. Not in my sector." For the first time, a flicker of anger cracked Custer's polished exterior. "You interfere in matters of German discipline. These women are ours. If you shield them, you make yourself complicit in their treason." Harper watched the exchange carefully. Out of the corner of his eye, he saw the women gathered near a barracks window, peeking out with pale faces. Lieselot's hands were pressed to the glass as if she could feel the words through it. The distance between the men at the gate and the women behind the boards felt like more than yards. It felt like the thin line between life and death. Frederick's reply was steady. "They are not traitors to my army. They are prisoners in my care. And I will not hand them over to be shot in a ditch so you can make an example." Custer studied him, eyes cold and calculating. Then he leaned in, lowering his voice. "You cannot guard them forever, Colonel. War moves. Lines shift. One day you will move on. And on that day, we will finish what we started." He turned sharply, signaled to his driver, and climbed back into the car. As the vehicle rolled away, the thin veil of civility went with it. The threat remained, hanging in the air like smoke from distant fires. Harper exhaled, not realizing he'd been holding his breath. "He's not bluffing," he muttered. Frederick's eyes stayed on the disappearing car. "No," he agreed. "He isn't." He turned to Harper. "Double the guards. And get this up the chain. General Hubner needs to hear all of it. If Custer wants a fight over those women, he's going to get one, with witnesses." The message to General Hubner went out before noon, carried by a runner and encoded through a field radio. By late afternoon, the air around the rail yard crackled with tension, the kind that settles into soldiers' bones before they even know why. No one said it aloud, but every man in the perimeter had sensed the same shift in the wind after Custer's visit. Something was coming. Something deliberate. Something dangerous. Harper spent the early evening checking the guard rotations himself. The women had been moved to a more secure outbuilding, a brick supply shed reinforced with sandbags and boarded windows. Inside, a small lantern flickered as Lieselot and the others sat huddled on old crates, speaking to one another in low, fearful tones. When Harper stepped in to check on them, several flinched before recognizing him. "You're safe," he reminded them quietly. "No one is getting in here tonight." Lieselot gave a tired nod, though her eyes remained uneasy. "He won't stop," she whispered. "Not until we are dead or back in their hands." Harper crouched down to her level. "Maybe not. But he's going to find out Americans don't scare easy." A tiny smile flickered across her face, frail but real. "You remind me of my brother," she said softly. "He always believed people had good in them. Even in war. Your brother sounds like a smart man. He died at Stalingrad." The smile faded. Harper lowered his gaze, feeling the weight of that truth sink in. War took brothers, fathers, friends. It left behind women like her, caught between loyalty, survival, and terror. He couldn't begin to understand everything she'd endured, but he understood one thing: she didn't deserve to be hunted. Outside, night fell fast. The camp dimmed to a muted scatter of lanterns. Fog rolled over the tracks, swallowing distance and sound. Men tightened their grips on rifles. The air tasted of cold metal and smoke. Just after midnight, O'Donnell came running from the northern watch post. "Sarge," he hissed, breath pluming in the air. "Movement in the tree line. More than one. Could be animals, but I don't think so." "Custer's men?" Harper asked. O'Donnell nodded grimly. "Looks organized." Harper grabbed his rifle and followed O'Donnell at a jog to the north gate. The ground was thick with frost, crunching softly under their boots. At the fence, the two MPs on duty pointed toward a patch of darkness beyond the tree-line. "There," one murmured. "See it?" A faint glimmer of metal. The silhouette of a helmet. A low murmur of German voices. Harper's stomach tightened. This wasn't a reconnaissance patrol. This was a retrieval team. He motioned for silence and ducked behind a stack of crates. Through the fog, he could now see several figures creeping closer, using the ruins as cover. Their movements were practiced, disciplined, and deadly quiet. A coordinated infiltration. Custer wasn't bluffing. Harper whispered, "Get Frederick." Now. By the time Colonel Frederick arrived, coat thrown over his shoulders, jaw set with that familiar iron resolve, the Germans were already closer. Harper counted 6, maybe 7. More could be waiting behind them. "They're trying to take the women," Harper said, voice low. Frederick scanned the tree-line, eyes narrowing. "They're testing us. They want to see how far they can push before we push back." O'Donnell asked, "What's the play, sir?" Frederick's answer was immediate. "We hold the line. No one gets inside this perimeter. If they open fire, we return it. If they try to breach, you stop them cold." He paused, then added, "General Hubner's orders will come in the morning. We just need to keep everyone alive until then." As the Germans advanced, one of them raised a hand and shouted something guttural in German. The Americans didn't answer. The silence itself became another weapon, an unspoken warning. The Germans switched tactics. Two began circling left, trying to flank. Another pair moved toward the fence, cutters glinting faintly in the lantern light. On my signal, Frederick whispered. The cutters touched the wire. Now! The crack of rifles shattered the fog-soaked night. Bullets tore through branches, splinters erupting like sparks. The Germans dove for cover, firing back blindly. The fence line lit in frantic bursts of muzzle flash. Harper fired, ducked, moved, fired again. A German soldier toppled into the brush with a shout. Another yelled orders, trying to rally his team. Inside the supply shed, the women screamed as bullets snapped through the air outside. Lieselot threw herself over the youngest girl, shielding her with her body. Stay down! Don't move! Frederick shouted to his men. Hold them! Push them back to the tree line! The Americans pressed forward, firing in controlled bursts. The Germans faltered under the pressure. Their left flank broke first, scrambling backward through the undergrowth. Two dragged a wounded man between them. Another dropped his rifle entirely and fled into the darkness. Within minutes, the attack sputtered and collapsed entirely. The forest swallowed the last fleeing figures, their retreat muffled by the night. Harper held his breath, waiting for another wave. None came. Frederick exhaled hard, lowering his rifle. They'll be back, he said quietly. They weren't trying to win. They were testing our resolve. Harper nodded. And they got their answer. When the women were finally brought out to survey the damage, Lieselot stepped toward Harper, pale but steady. You fought for us, she said, her voice trembling with awe rather than fear. We fight for anyone who needs protecting, Harper replied. She stared at him, eyes glistening with tears she wasn't ashamed to show. You don't know what that means, she whispered. No one has ever stood between us and them. No one. Across the yard, Frederick was already sending another message to General Hubner, stating clearly. The women cannot remain here. Their own officers are committing acts that violate the laws of war. Immediate intervention required. ***. The ink had barely dried when Harper returned to the shed. The women watched him as though he were the last barrier between them and death. He knelt beside Lieselot, speaking in a low, resolute tone. Whatever happens tomorrow, he said, we're not letting anyone drag you back. For the first time since her capture, Lieselot allowed herself to believe him. Outside, the fog thickened, swallowing the battlefield, but not the resolve that had settled into every American soldier who had stood watch that night. Dawn broke over the rail yard like a slow awakening after a long, bruising fight. The fog still clung to the ground, swirling around boots and broken crates like restless ghosts, but the first rays of sunlight cut through enough to reveal the aftermath: churned mud, splintered fence posts, shell casings scattered like seeds of a bitter harvest. The Americans stood guard with drained eyes and stiff shoulders, yet every man remained alert. No one forgot the night. Just before sunrise, a jeep tore down the road from the western ridge, dust kicking behind its tires. The driver barely braked before General Clarence Hubner climbed out, still wearing the same greatcoat from the previous night's headquarters briefing. His face was worn with exhaustion, but his eyes were sharp, too sharp for the morning after such violence. Frederick met him halfway across the yard. "General," he greeted, saluting. Hubner returned the salute briskly. "Colonel, I got your message. The attack confirms everything you warned. Where are the women now?" "In the secure shed. My men have been guarding them all night." "Any casualties?" "3 lightly wounded. No fatalities. The Germans pulled back when they saw they couldn't break us." Hubner gave a grim nod. "Custer won't stop. Not while those women are alive to contradict his disciplinary actions. He wants them silenced before we can question them formally." Harper, who had approached silently with O'Donnell, added, "Sir, they were scared out of their minds. They knew exactly what Custer came for." Hubner's jaw tightened. "Then we won't give him the chance." He gestured toward the shed. "Bring the women out. I want to hear their statements directly. Every detail." Frederick signaled his men. Moments later, the shed door opened and the women stepped into the morning light, wrapped in blankets, faces pale but steady. Liselott led them, and when she spotted Harper, she paused, just long enough to offer a grateful, fragile smile. The soldiers parted to give the group space. A table was set up by the tracks, a lantern still burning on it despite the growing daylight. Hubner took a seat, pen ready, paper clipped to a clipboard. He motioned for Liselott to sit opposite him. Through the interpreter, she gave her full account, the orders from Metz, the execution of the 2 signal auxiliaries, the threats Major Custer issued whenever anyone mentioned surrender, the punishments carried out under the so-called Karlsruhe discipline order. She spoke of the night they fled, the chase, the terror etched into her every breath. Her voice trembled, but never faltered. 2 other women spoke as well. Their stories matched hers almost exactly. Each testimony was a weight placed on the scale, tipping it further away from Custer's carefully maintained facade of military order and deeper into the realm of criminal brutality. When they finished, Hubner closed his notebook slowly, as if sealing the weight of what he had heard. "Colonel," he said to Frederick, "these women are not going back to German hands under any circumstances. As of this moment, they fall under direct Allied protection. I'll order a full transfer to Luxembourg. They'll be processed as formal prisoners of war with full rights and security. No German officer can contest that transfer." A collective breath of relief seemed to move through the women, a ripple of emotion so strong Harper felt it echo in his own chest. Liselott covered her mouth with her hand, tears gathering in her eyes, not from fear this time, but from something dangerously close to hope. Before the convoy could be prepared, Frederick ordered the perimeter widened. Men reinforced the gates, repaired the cut wire, and positioned sandbags along likely approach routes. Custer's men might try one more desperate attempt before the transfer. Hubner, noticing Harper's tired posture, rested a hand on his shoulder. "You did the right thing," he said quietly. "Most men don't realize war isn't won by killing, Sergeant. Sometimes it's won by refusing to let evil finish its work." Harper swallowed hard, unsure how to reply. He simply nodded. By midday, the convoy was assembled: 3 troop trucks, 2 jeeps, and an armored car taken from a supply depot. Frederick walked alongside the women as they boarded, offering quiet reassurance. Liselott paused at the truck step and looked back at Harper. "You saved us," she whispered. "We just did what was right," he said. She leaned forward slightly. Not close enough to break propriety, but just enough that her words reached him in a soft breath. "No. You stood between us and death. That is more than right." The trucks rumbled to life. Just as the convoy began rolling toward the main road, a distant crack echoed from the eastern ridge. Harper's instincts snapped to attention. He raised his binoculars, and his blood ran cold. A German staff car was racing toward them, Custer standing in the back seat, gripping the windshield frame with one hand and waving a pistol with the other. "Contact east!" Harper shouted. Frederick spun around. The armored car adjusted its turret. Hubner, still standing near the lead jeep, stiffened. Custer's car skidded sideways, wheels kicking up mud, as he aimed directly at the lead truck, the one carrying Liselott and the other women. His driver pushed forward with reckless speed. "Hold fire!" Hubner barked. "Wait until we're sure." The German car suddenly veered, engine roaring as it closed the distance, Custer's face twisted with murderous determination. There was no doubt now. "Fire!" The armored car spat a burst of machine gun fire. The German vehicle lurched as bullets shredded its engine block. Smoke erupted from the hood. The driver lost control, and the car spun violently before slamming into a ditch. Custer flew from the open back seat and tumbled across the dirt. Silence fell. No more shots came. Frederick approached the wreck cautiously, pistol drawn. Custer lay motionless, his uniform caked with mud, his pistol several feet away. His eyes opened when Frederick reached him. "You think you can erase discipline?" Custer rasped. "You think you can save them?" Frederick knelt beside him. "We already did." Custer's eyes fluttered shut. The threat was finally over. When Frederick returned to the convoy, Hubner gave a nod. "Move out." The motors growled, the wheels turned, and the convoy rolled onto the main road. Harper trotted alongside the women's truck briefly. Lieselot leaned out just enough to speak. "When we had no one," she said softly, "you stood for us. You didn't have to, but you did what had to be done." Harper matched her gaze, steady and warm. "Get to safety. That's all that matters." The truck pulled away, dust swirling behind it. The women inside watched silently as the camp faded from view, no longer a place of fear, but the place where strangers had chosen to protect them when their own commanders would not. As the convoy disappeared toward the Luxembourg border, the morning sun finally broke through the fog, painting the landscape gold, a quiet promise that, even in war, humanity could still win ground.